Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Just talked a little bit about the spring transfer portal, that window, kind of some of the big storylines there. I want to talk a little bit about some of the guys that could be next up in terms of replacing some of the NFL first-round draft picks. Not going to obviously go through all 32 picks, but just going to talk about some of the guys that I really like and some of the more interesting changes that are going to happen in this upcoming season. So, obviously, number one overall pick, Cam Ward to the Tennessee Titans out of Miami. And obviously, Miami got another big transfer portal quarterback in Carson Beck, former Georgia quarterback. This is going to be a big question of whether he can actually replicate what Cam Ward did at Miami, whether he can lead them to a little more team success. And also, Beck has a nagging elbow injury from the college football playoff that has kept him out of spring practice entirely right now. So he's expected to be cleared to participate fully this summer for player-led practices, and that's going to be really important, obviously, as he also looks to gain chemistry with a brand new wide receiver group. One big difference from last year to this year, Cam Ward came into a really experienced wide receiver room at Miami, led by Xavier Restrepo, and Carson Beck is not going to have that. He's coming in with pretty much an entire new pass-catching group. Young guys, talented guys, but they're going to have to prove themselves. So it's going to be a little bit of a different circumstance there compared to what Cam Ward came into last season. And obviously, we know that Carson Beck has the arm talent to get this done. That's always been one of his big pluses as a quarterback, is the arm talent. And Miami's scheme is much more high-powered offensively compared to what Georgia ran. So this could be a place where Carson Beck could really thrive as a quarterback. I think he probably honestly had a better 2023 season, but that's also, you're playing with Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers. Those are going to be some guys that, yeah, they're not bad football players, I would say. But 2023 completed about 72% of his passes, had 3,900 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Struggled a little more this last season in 2024. Completion percentage dropped to about 64%. Had 12 interceptions, did increase his touchdowns to 28, but also that interception total went up. And then also he struggled against some of the bigger programs. At Alabama, early on in the season, went 27 of 50, had 3 touchdowns, but also had 3 interceptions in that game. At Texas, 23 of 41, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in that game. Georgia did still win that game 30-15 though. But then at Ole Miss, 20 of 31, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception, and then also had 5 combined interceptions against Florida and Mississippi State. So that's going to be a big question mark here, is decision making. Can he cut down on that total? Can the offensive scheme give him a little more options? And can he kind of thrive there, similar to what Cam Ward did? Another guy I'm looking at, obviously, so Jaxson Dart, the other quarterback that was drafted in the first round, he's gone at Ole Miss, and it sounds like he's going to be replaced by Austin Simmons. Ole Miss elected to not go after a veteran quarterback in the portal. They did pick up Division II All-American Trinidad Chambliss, who had 51 combined touchdowns last year and 25 rushing touchdowns as a quarterback, which I thought was pretty incredible. But this is Austin Simmons' job to lose. This is a guy that he reclassified from 2025 to 2023, enrolled early as a 17-year-old at Ole Miss, also was a member of the Ole Miss baseball team the past 2 seasons, made 13 relief appearances for them last year, but done with baseball, focusing only on football, left-handed quarterback, and I really am high on Austin Simmons. I think he's a guy that can do a lot, has all the physical traits Also, I think has it mentally to be able to be a really good starting quarterback for Ole Miss. Has spent 2 years behind Jaxson Dart, just developing, learning, getting comfortable in the system, in the scheme. Only has played 79 snaps in his career, but really showcased what he could do in that Georgia win when he had a 75-yard touchdown drive and he just looked incredible in that game. Came in, Jaxson Dart got hurt pretty early and just showed a ton of poise, showed control, command of that offense. I think that's going to be a guy that can really be a breakout star in the SEC this upcoming year. Will Campbell, this is going to be a big guy that they lost at LSU. From the time he came on campus as a true freshman, basically entrenched as that left tackle for the past 3 years. And LSU's losing 4 starting offensive linemen this year. It sounds like the guy that's going to replace Will Campbell is going to be Tyree Williams. So when Will Campbell sat out the bowl game, Tyree Williams stepped into that spot. Also seems to have kind of held on to it throughout the spring. And this is a guy that's 6'7", 310, but also incredibly versatile. Had snaps at 4 different positions last year. Left tackle, left guard, right guard, right tackle, only didn't play center, and hasn't allowed a sack in 82 pass blocking opportunities. Has kind of embraced being one of the leaders on that offensive line for LSU this upcoming year. I think he's going to have a pretty good season, but that's got some really big shoes to fill with Will Campbell, what he did for the past 3 years at LSU. It's going to be tough to kind of replace that and step into that role as the blindside protector for Garrett Nussmeier. We'll see if Tyree Adams can actually fill it. I'm pretty confident that he can, just based on his production, versatility, a lot of different things, but I think that's a guy that can really be a solid left tackle for LSU. One of the teams I'm looking at, I guess, picks as well, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant from Michigan, both first rounders. I'm going to kind of combine them, but that's both of those guys, really big loss for Michigan. You lose 2 first-round picks at defensive tackle. You're going to have to replace that. Rayshon Benny, Trey Williams, Damon Payne, those are all names that I think are going to be in that rotation. Rayshon Benny, he's going to be the leader here. One of the few remaining rotation players from the 2023 National Championship team, 5th-year senior. He's going to be tasked with kind of keeping up that standard, and he's appeared in 42 career games, has 56 tackles over the past 2 years, recorded a sack in the spring game. I know the spring game's like whatever, but this is a guy that's a leader on that Michigan defense, should really step in and take over as that kind of number 1 defensive tackle for the Wolverines. Trey Williams, he's probably the closest, at least physically, to what Kenneth Grant brings to the table. Kenneth Grant, obviously, at almost 340 pounds, kind of a hard guy to replicate physically, but Trey Williams, 6'2", 315, pretty close, I guess. Also, he's kind of flashed the pass rushing ability to be a more complete defensive tackle, complements that space-eating stature. I think he's probably going to be the number 2 defensive tackle. Had 14 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks last season. Only started 3 games for Clemson, but appeared in all 14. I think that's going to be a guy that, if he's not that second defensive tackle, at the very minimum, he's going to be rotating in for Michigan this year. Damon Payne from Alabama is another guy I'm looking at to try to fill that rotation. He only has 30 total tackles in his career, only ever has half a sack than all 3 seasons he's kind of played, so definitely more of a space-eating run defender in Damon Payne, but still a guy that should definitely get playing time for Michigan as they try to keep that elite defensive line going. That's something that's been a theme for Michigan in the past 5 years, at least, I would say. Micah Williams and Jalen Walker to a lesser extent, but they're really going to have to replace that production on the pass rush from Georgia, but they brought in a guy in the spring portal, and Ela Medozier from Army, West Point, had a breakout season last year. Smaller guy, 6'3", 245, but 34 tackles, 6.5 sacks in his sophomore season. And I think this is going to be a guy, he could take some time to adjust to SEC. Just the level of play, his body type, a little smaller. But I would not be surprised at all if he kind of takes over that jack role for Georgia, takes over what Michael Williams was doing. There's a couple other guys, Gabe Harris Jr., Quintavious Johnson, that may factor in there, but they're a lot less proven, I think, and the fact that Georgia went out to get Medozier in the spring portal says a lot about what they were kind of expecting from that position. Then one of the other programs I kind of think is kind of interesting of how they're going to replace two guys that really had a big impact for them is Penn State. How do you replace Abdul Carter on the defensive side of the ball, as well as what Tyler Warren did for them offensively? With Abdul Carter, that answer looks a little more simple. Danny Dennis-Sutton is going to be the number one defensive end, number one pass rusher for Penn State. Obviously, he had a really great year last year, too. 13 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks while playing on the other side of Abdul Carter. Also was 27th nationally among edge rushers in pressure rate. He was at 12.5% pressure rate. Abdul Carter was number one at 19.6%, which is a pretty incredible number. But he really leveled up in the 3 playoff games that Penn State had a good chunk of his TFLs and sacks actually during that time. Also, his pressure rate ticked up about another 2%. Kind of seems ready to take over as that primary pass rusher. This is a team that, again, is going to be right in the hunt for a college football playoff berth, for a potential Big Ten championship, potentially even a national championship. But also, I think, who's going to be on the other side of Danny Dennis-Sutton? That's going to be the big question mark here. Will he attract more double teams just because Abdul Carter's gone? And how he kind of reacts to those, I think, is going to be really interesting to look at. But this is definitely going to be the main guy on defense for Penn State, the guy that they're going to look to get a sack, get a big stop on third down, and the guy that's going to try to replace what Abdul Carter did, which obviously is a pretty Herculean task. But an even more Herculean task is replacing what Tyler Warren did. You can't really, honestly, the guy lined up everywhere, basically in the backfield, across the line of scrimmage. And so it's going to be, I think, also a little bit on the receivers, on the running backs to kind of fill in some of those gaps where he did. But in terms of tight ends, Khalil Dinkins does return. He was kind of the number 2 tight end last year. He has had 14 catches, 122 yards last year, 2 touchdowns, but he's definitely going to play. Even if he might not be the number 1 tight end, will for sure have playing time because he's a really strong blocker. Penn State likes to have him in when they're running the ball. Obviously, this is a run-heavy team. May even lean on it even more this year, just because Katron Allen, because Nick Singleton are back. You obviously get another year of that backfield. Khalil Dinkins can be a guy that can block for them at the absolute minimum. I think he also has a little more pass-catching ability than people kind of expect. And then the other guy, I think, Luke Reynolds. This is a guy that has some really high hopes. He's going to be a true sophomore. Was a number 70 overall player in the 2024 class. Had 9 catches for 111 yards and a touchdown last season. Also had 3 catches in college football playoff games. And also had a 32-yard run against Minnesota. So a little more versatile, a little more of the skill set of what Tyler Warren brought to the table, and a guy that can definitely step up into a bigger role in year 2. I think that's certainly very possible. But again, that's going to be really tough to replace Tyler Warren's production. And how Penn State does it, I think, is going to be a really interesting storyline that plays out throughout the 2025 season. So we're going to take our second break of the show. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about some undrafted free agents that I think could make some impacts and make NFL rosters and potentially have really good careers. But first, we're going to take a short break on the GSMC College Football Podcast.